Hi, everybody. This is Randy Brown for Blogging with Mr. Brown, and I am going to reveal the hidden structure of the Mentalist. So let's get going, shall we? Okay, now, number one, I want to dispel a myth that a lot of people have, and that is the myth of three-act structure. Now, the thing about it is that not even Shakespeare used three-act structure. Now, it is true that every story has a beginning, middle, and an end, but I would like to file that information under true but useless. Yeah, every story has a beginning, middle, end, but the problem is that this information is no more helpful than knowing that page 2 comes after page 1, page 3 comes after page 2, and then also it's no more helpful than saying, oh, dialogue is when one person speaks and then another person says another thing. Okay, and a lot of really famous screenplay gurus like David Trottier says, there's basically like 5 acts. You got the Catalyst, Big Event, Pinch, Crisis, Showdown, and even Pilar Alessandria, a famous screenplay teacher, says, there's Act 1, then Act 2, then Act 2B, and then Act 3. So, like, ironically, basically, it's 4 acts, and The Mentalist takes place in 4 acts. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to provide some links in the description, and it will show you that not only is The Mentalist written in 4 acts, but when the writers of the show wrote the screenplays, they actually put Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. Okay? And again, Shakespeare didn't even use the 3 act structure. A lot of Shakespeare's really famous plays, Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet included, are based in 5 acts. So 3 act structure is a myth, and knowing that a screenplay has a beginning, middle, and end probably won't help you any more than knowing that screenplays are made up of words, and it's just useless information. So now, in the 4 act structure of the Mentalist, certain things happen, and not only do certain things happen, there are also certain characters that you have to have in specific acts. So the Mentalist is comprised of 4 acts, and there are 2 mini acts, one at the beginning and one at the end. The mini act at the beginning is called the teaser, and the mini act at the end is called the tag. Now, and every act ends with what's known in TV parlance as an act out. And basically, on different shows, there's different ways to end act outs, but typically on The Mentalist, an act out is comprised of a little mini cliffhanger of either somebody in grave danger or a dead body is found. So, for the first 3 acts, it has an act out. So, like I said, there's either somebody in danger or a dead body turns up. Okay, so now the first act is the little mini act called the teaser. Now, in the teaser, it's typically one of 3 things: either somebody being murdered, the dead body is found, or Patrick Jane and the rest of the crew is found at the crime scene, looking over the bodies and looking for clues. It's pretty simple. And typically in the teaser, they set up something for the very end act, which is the tag. Now, usually there'll be some joke or like maybe Patrick Jane likes bananas and everybody else tells him he hates bananas, and then at the very end, the joke is that he sends an envelope with printouts of bananas on them. It's something dumb, usually like that. But the teaser typically sets up something that will be resolved in the very final scene of the show. Okay, so now after the teaser is done, it ends on a button. And a button in TV parlance is like a really catchy line or a dialogue. In CSI, it's typically David Caruso going something like I before E, except after C. Some really catchy line or some dumb joke. And then we go into Act 1. And like I said before, in certain acts, there are certain characters that have to be there. And a little bit later on, I'm going to go over, the dynamics of the acts and, what has to be in a scene. But as far as Act 1 goes, there are certain people in there called the friends, the family, and the coworkers. Now, after they find the body, they find a clue, and basically, like clockwork, they interview the friends, then the family, then the coworkers. It's like clockwork. In this act, these people have to be there. And then at the end of Act 1, like I said, there's an act out, somebody in danger, another dead body turns up. And then in Act 2, this is a character that is in every episode of The Mentalist, every single one, and he or she is in a lot of CSI episodes and in a lot of Criminal Minds episodes. And this character is what I lovingly refer to as the obvious guy or the obvious girl. Now, who this person is in Act 2. The clues lead to somebody who is obviously the killer. It's like some guy found at a mechanic shop who's drenched with the victim's blood, and it's like, oh, this guy has a bad attitude. He's mean to the CSI team. He's mean to the Mentalist people. He's just an all-around dirtbag, all around. And usually, typically in Act 2, there's an interrogation scene with this person. And it seems like there's no way that this guy is not the killer. This is the obvious guy. This guy definitely did it. And then in Act 3, guess what? And this is in every episode of The Mentalist, every episode of CSI, every episode of Criminal Minds. It turns out that they find some clues, and it turns out that the obvious guy, even though he was drenched in blood, the victim's blood, and was found at the crime scene, guess what? He didn't do it. And it's actually Villain B that did it. So now basically that they've discovered that Villain B is the killer, they go to a new location, and at the end of Act 3, one of the main characters' lives are in danger. Typically not the Mentalist, because the name of the show is The Mentalist, and if the Mentalist dies, there is no show. So typically it's either one of the main characters or a love interest that's life is in danger. And in Act 4, there's a very specific series of things that happens. Number 1, they resolve the life or death situation. The characters escape. Then they take Villain B to the police station, and he confesses, or he gets caught and confesses. And then the last thing that happens in the show is typically the victims, or the friends of the victims, or the family of the victims. They say thank you for Patrick Jane, and then after the victims or the family says thank you to Patrick Jane, typically we're introduced to the tag, and the tag again is like a little mini act. And in the tag, anything that was set up in the teaser or Act 1 is typically paid off here. So, if everybody's making jokes about bananas in the first teaser or in the first act, typically, somebody will be like, oh, hey, we got a banana here, and wait, the insides are chopped up. How did you do that, Patrick Jane? And Patrick Jane's like, I tell you, but I'd have to kill you, and then boom, that's where it usually ends. Now, sometimes the tag can take a somber tone. Sometimes it won't be a joke, or sometimes it won't be just, answering all the questions that weren't answered in any of the other acts. Sometimes it'll be Patrick Jane just stewing about Red John, or just like, ends on something mildly depressing, like, Jane lying in the bed of his dead wife's house, something like that. So, and that is basically everything you need to know to structure a Mentalist story is in that structure. And then, like I said, there are a few things that have to be in every act. Some of these things are the Mentalist is made up of around 6 characters: Patrick Jane, Lisbon, Rigsby, Van Pelt, Cho, and then sometimes we have what I call the cop du jour. which is usually a chief or an agent. And typically, the episodes are each act is split up, alternating from Team A, which is the mentalist and one of the other characters, and then Team B, which is two other characters who are not the mentalist. And typically every scene is like bouncing back and forth from Team A, Team B, Team A, Team B, and then sometimes they'll just be everybody in the same scene in the bullpen shooting around ideas. And then after they shoot around ideas, they form a plan of attack. Then they separate again into Team A, Team B. Typically, Team B is made up of Rixby and Van Pelt, and is all about their romance, their goings on. And then Team A is typically Patrick, Jane, and Lisbon, and they have some romantic goings on. And then, both Team A and Team B, they eventually meet up at the end, and their plot lines are resolved. And then I'd like to say, this is basically how The Mentalist is made. Every episode is like this. And my theories on why The Mentalist ended in the 7th season is, number one, the first 5 seasons of The Mentalist were made up of characters that we know and love. They followed the structure rigidly. Like, there was no deviation in the structure. I have not seen one episode in the first 5 seasons that deviated from the structure. And then in the 6th season, they deviated from the structure, and that's, in my opinion, why they failed. They deviated from the structure. They got rid of a lot of the characters we know and loved, replaced them with characters we hated, and Patrick Jane was no longer working for the CBI. He was working for the FBI. And also, my theory of why it lasted 7 seasons and ended on season 6 is because in season 6, the fans were still strong. A lot of the people who liked the show didn't want to let the show go, but after the 6th season, people realized they didn't like it, and then finally in season 7, most of the diehard fans were like, you know what, this isn't what I signed on for. I'm quitting. That's the end of the show, and that was the end of the show. And every episode, Red John is mentioned, and usually at the end of every season, through Act 1 through Act 5, there was someone who, it might be Red John, this might be him, we killed him, and then in the next season, that wasn't really Red John, it was just Patsy. So usually, typically in every episode, there is a mention of Red John or Red John kills somebody. Now, like I said, 3-act structure is a myth. It doesn't exist. A lot of the even famous screenwriting teachers and authors don't use 3-act structure. Like, knowing that a movie has a beginning, middle, and end is useless. It's not going to help you. It's going to help you as much as knowing that screenplays are made of words, and then every scene takes place in a location. And like I said before, even Shakespeare didn't use 3-act structure. A lot of his famous plays were 5-act structures. Some were even 7-act. And the reason that the 3-act structure or even the 4 or 5-act structure was used had nothing to do with story. Like, back in the olden days, the reason they had acts in a play was because the audience could only hold their bladders for so long. Like, the audience had to pee, the cast and crew had to pee, plus the cast and crew had to make scene changes, they had to change the set, they had to change costumes. That is why acts were created. Like, if we did not have bladders, then movies would probably be around like 5 hours long. And if on stage the scenes magically changed without anybody like moving set and scenery around, acts wouldn't be a thing. Acts were not created with story in mind. Acts were created purely for logistical reasons. Knowing this structure, you will be able to craft an episode of The Mentalist. So this is basically how to write an episode of The Mentalist, and I would like to resurrect this show. If I had my druthers, this would be back on the air because I am a big fan of mentalism, and was a big fan of The Mentalist. And this is basically all you need to know in order to write an episode of The Mentalist. And like I said, if they would have stuck with the structure, I think they would have lasted until today. But like I said, with the last two seasons, they stuck all this FBI stuff in there. They got rid of characters we loved, introduced characters we hated, and that is basically The Mentalist in a nutshell. And my name is Randy Brown for Blogging with Mr. Brown, and I will see you, Latre. Okay, bye.